Professor Nick's larva adjusted his seven-eyed spectacles and gazed around the amphitheater with an expression that could only be described as academic superiority mixed with barely concealed disdain. His blue-green skin glistened under the academy's lighting, throat sacs inflating and deflating as he prepared to address his students. "Attention, third-cycle survival students," he announced, his voice resonating with the peculiar warbling tone typical of Zentorian educators. "Today marks the commencement of your most significant assessment, the Primitive Planet Survival Challenge." A wave of excited chittering, hissing, and various approximations of applause rippled through the classroom. The 32 students represented 27 different species from across the Galactic Federation, each with their own evolutionary advantages, from the silicon-based Draxites with their crystallizing skin to the amorphous Blobins who could reshape their forms at will. And then there was Maya Daniels, the only human, sitting in the back row, notepad in hand, an actual physical notepad with paper and pencil. How quaint, while everyone else used neural recorders or memory enhancement symbiotes. Nick's larva's fourth eye swiveled specifically to observe her. Humans, so bizarrely limited. No exoskeletons, no natural toxins, no specialized appendages. Just soft, pink skin, and those strange five-digited manipulators they called hands. The professor couldn't help but click his mandibles in amusement. For those unfamiliar with galactic educational standards. He continued, pointedly gazing at Maya. "This challenge has been the cornerstone of advanced survival training for 8,000 cycles. You will be transported to a Class M forested moon, currently in its winter phase. Temperature, approximately -15 standard units. Your assignment is deceptively simple." He paused for dramatic effect, a technique he'd perfected over his 300-year teaching career. "Construct a shelter capable of sustaining your life forms for 3 full rotations. No modern tools, no prefabricated materials. Nothing but your evolved capabilities and whatever nature provides." Lorb Tentrill, the top-ranked Muckweller student, released a bubbling sound of confidence from his breathing pores. The gelatinous academic star had evolved on a swamp world and could secrete hardening protective barriers around himself in minutes. "Questions?" Nick's larva asked, hoping the human would reveal her anxiety publicly. Maya raised her hand. "Just one of them. So inefficient." "Yes, Student Daniels? Will we be judged on the same criteria, or will there be species-specific adjustments to account for biological differences?" Nick's larva's mouth parts twitched into what passed for a Zentorian smile. "An excellent question that reveals your concerns. The criteria are universal. Shelter must maintain survivable temperature, repel environmental threats, and demonstrate resource efficiency. We do not handicap our evaluations based on evolutionary disadvantages." Several students snickered or made their species-equivalent expressions of amusement. "Your species may have developed impressive technology." The professor continued, unable to resist a little lecture, "But this exercise tests what nature has given you, not what your factories can produce. Adaptability is the greatest survival trait in our galaxy. Those who evolve superior natural abilities will, I expect, demonstrate clear advantages." He gestured toward the holographic display showing the testing ground's dense forest, snow-covered ground, various topographical features. "You have exactly 42 standard hours to prepare. Study the environment. Consider your approach. When you arrive, you will have 1 planetary rotation, approximately 29 standard hours to complete your shelter before evaluation begins." Maya scribbled something in her notepad, face neutral but focused. Nick's larva couldn't help himself. "Student Daniels, I've taken the liberty of adjusting the environmental controls in your sector to ensure you won't suffer hypothermia. We wouldn't want the only human in our exchange program to become a medical emergency, would we?" He expected gratitude. Instead, Maya looked up with an expression the professor couldn't quite interpret. "Thank you, Professor, but that won't be necessary. Humans evolved dealing with temperature variations. I'll manage with the standard conditions." Nick's larva blinked all 7 eyes simultaneously in surprise. Perhaps the human had more pride than sense. No matter, reality would soon provide its harsh lesson. Very well. Standard conditions for all participants. Prepare accordingly, students. Dismissed. As the class dispersed, a cluster of students surrounded Maya in what Nick's larva recognized as the interspecies equivalent of schoolyard taunting. The professor remained at his podium, pretending to organize notes while eavesdropping shamelessly. These moments often revealed more about species dynamics than formal studies. How exactly does your kind survive without natural defenses? Asked Lorne, a spiny quillback whose ancestors had evolved metallic bristles that could be launched at predators. Your skin tears if you brush against rough surfaces. And your thermal regulation is completely internal, added Plex, a hovering cloud of symbiotic microorganisms that could condense or expand based on ambient temperature. Such an inefficient design. Maya gathered her materials calmly, seemingly unbothered. We manage. Orb tendril oozed closer, his gelatinous form rippling with smug superiority. The muck dweller's scholastic achievements were matched only by his insufferable attitude. My species constructs hardened dwellings from our own secretions within minutes, Glorb bubbled proudly, his translucent body displaying the complex chemical reactions occurring within. The structures can withstand acid rain, extreme temperatures, and predator attacks. What will you use, Maya? Those pathetic limbs to pile up sticks. Several students made their species equivalent of laughter hissing, vibrating, releasing pheromones of amusement. Maya shouldered her simple backpack. Actually, Glorb, humans have been building shelters since before we discovered fire. We'll see how it goes. You'll freeze, predicted Zort, a methane-breathing amphibian. Humans are so temperature-sensitive. The human student finally displayed a hint of emotion, not fear, but something that Professor Nick's larva found puzzling. The corners of her mouth turned slightly upward in what his xenobiology training identified as a smile, though it didn't match the standard parameters for human happiness. We've survived ice ages with nothing but animal skins and determination, she said quietly. This will be a fun camping trip. Nick's larva decided to intervene, approaching the group with academic authority. While this social exchange is fascinating, I recommend all students focus their energies on preparation. He turned specifically to Maya. Student Daniels, perhaps you should visit the xenobiology archives. There are several documented cases of human survival attempts in harsh environments. The failures might prove instructive. Thanks, Professor, Maya replied with that same puzzling expression. But I think I'll stick with what I know works. As she walked away, Nick's larva clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The human displayed unexpected confidence. Misplaced, certainly, but interesting nonetheless. He made a mental note to pay special attention to her sector during the challenge. Documenting human failure would make an excellent addition to his forthcoming publication, Evolutionary Dead Ends, Why Technology-Dependent Species Falter in Natural Selection Scenarios. The transport shuttle descended through wispy cloud layers, its atmospheric stabilizers struggling against the turbulent winter winds. Professor Nick's larva stood at the forward viewport, 7 eyes blinking in sequence as he surveyed the test site with satisfaction. Perfect conditions, he announced to the faculty assistants. Temperature registering at -17 standard units. Precipitation likely within 6 hours. Wind velocity sufficient to accelerate heat loss by approximately 28%. Below them stretched a vast coniferous forest blanketed in snow. Ancient trees reminiscent of Earth's pines but with a distinctive purplish hue stood like sentinels across the landscape. Frozen streams cut silver ribbons through the white terrain, and rocky outcroppings punctuated the otherwise uniform woodland. Challenging but not immediately lethal, remarked Assistant Professor Blurg, his sensory tentacles waving appreciatively. An excellent selection this year. The shuttle touched down in a circular clearing that served as the central deployment zone. students filed out into the biting cold, their breath forming clouds of varying colors and densities based on their respiratory biochemistry. Attention. Nick's larva projected his voice across the clearing. Welcome to Moon KDX7. You are currently experiencing local winter conditions that will persist throughout your assessment period. Each of you will be escorted to your designated sector, approximately 1 square kilometer of terrain within which you must construct your shelter. He gestured toward a row of faculty members holding scanning devices. Before deployment, all students will undergo equipment inspection. Remember, no modern tools, no synthetic materials, no communication devices. Any violations will result in immediate disqualification. The inspection process began efficiently. Most species carried minimal supplies. Their evolutionary adaptations were their primary resources. The silicon-based Draxites had withdrawn into their crystalline semi-hibernation state to conserve energy. The methane breathers had activated their internal thermal accelerators, causing their skin to glow faintly orange. Glorb Tentril, predictably, carried nothing at all. His gelatinous form had already begun producing the chemical precursors for his shelter secretions, visible as fluorescent blue veins pulsing within his translucent body. Nothing to declare, Glorb bubbled confidently as the scanner passed over him. Just my superior evolutionary adaptations. When Maya's turn came, Nick's larva moved closer to observe. The human wore only simple insulated clothing, no special adaptations, no biological advantages. She carried a small pack which, when opened for inspection, contained only basic items: a water container, nutrient bars, and a curious coil of plant fiber rope. That's all you've brought? Nick's larva couldn't contain his disbelief. No specialized equipment? No additional insulation layers? Maya shrugged. The rules said no modern tools. This rope is just twisted plant fibers. Everything else I need will be out there. She gestured toward the forest with those strange 5-digited appendages. The scanner confirmed compliance. Nothing technological, nothing synthetic. Your confidence is either admirable or delusional, Nick's larva remarked dryly. Your sector is 4 kilometers east, with a stream running through its northern quadrant. I suggest you begin immediately. Nightfall will bring a temperature drop of approximately 12 additional units. Maya nodded, adjusted her pack, and began walking toward her assigned territory with a steady, purposeful stride that Nick's larva found puzzling. Most species would display some signs of stress or urgency when facing potential environmental threats. That one won't last the night, Assistant Professor Blurg predicted, watching the human's diminishing form. Should we prepare the emergency extraction team? Keep them on standby, Nick's larva agreed. But let's see how far the human's baseless confidence takes her first. It should prove educationally valuable for the other students. Professor Nick's larva settled into the monitoring station, a transparent dome erected at the center of the test zone offering a commanding view of the surrounding forest. Inside, an array of surveillance screens displayed live feeds from each student's sector. Faculty assistants manned the stations, recording observations and vital sign data for later analysis. Let's begin our official observations, Nick's larva announced, activating his recording apparatus with a flick of his appendage. Hour 1 of the primitive shelter construction assessment is now underway. The screens revealed fascinating diversity in approaches across species. In Sector 7, the twin vapory students were condensing atmospheric moisture into rigid ice structures, their gaseous bodies pulsating as they manipulated molecular bonds. 3 sectors over, a lithomorph was burrowing into the ground, using diamond-hard appendages to create a subterranean chamber naturally insulated by soil and rock. Note the hive mind collective in Sector 12, Assistant Professor Blurg pointed out. They're arranging themselves into a living shelter formation. Quite efficient, though technically not a constructed habitat. Nick's larva chittered in agreement. Mark them down for partial credit. The assignment specifically requires environmental resource utilization, not merely biological adaptation. the professor's attention drifted inevitably to Glorb Tentral's sector. As expected, the muck-dweller had already begun the impressive process of secreting his shelter. Glorb's body undulated rhythmically as specialized glands discharged a viscous blue-green substance that hardened upon contact with air. Layer by layer, a dome-like structure took shape around him, translucent at first, but gradually becoming opaque as additional layers reinforced the walls. Exemplary demonstration of evolved adaptation, Nick's larva narrated for his recording. Student Tentral's secretion shelter will likely be complete within 30 minutes, providing optimal thermal regulation and structural integrity. "He's showing off," remarked junior faculty Prill, her eye stalk swiveling toward the screen. "Those decorative ridges serve no survival purpose. Aesthetic considerations reflect psychological comfort," Nick's larva countered, "which factors into survival metrics. But point taken." His attention shifted to Maya's sector. The human had spent the first hour doing surprisingly little shelter construction. Instead, she methodically moved through her territory, examining trees, collecting fallen branches, and testing various stones she picked up from the stream bed. She appeared to be sorting materials into piles, long straight branches in one, shorter pieces in another, flat stones in a third. What precisely is student Daniels attempting? Nick's larva wondered aloud, mandibles clicking in irritation. She's merely collecting and categorizing debris. At this rate, she'll have nothing but piles of sticks when nightfall arrives. Blurg extended a sensory tentacle toward the human's vital signs display. Her core temperature remains within normal parameters, despite the cold. Curious? On screen, Maya had begun clearing a flat area near a large stone outcropping that would provide some wind protection. She measured out a rectangular space by pacing it off, then began driving sturdy branches into the ground at regular intervals along the perimeter. Is she attempting some sort of primitive frame structure? Nick's larva mused skeptically. Without binding material or covering, it will provide minimal protection. The monitoring continued as afternoon waned. While other students made visible progress, the crystallix had grown a mineral enclosure that refracted sunlight to create internal warmth. The bog wraiths had woven living vegetation into dense, insulated walls. Maya's activities seemed frustratingly inefficient to Nick's larva's professional assessment. She spent nearly 2 hours creating a flat platform of interlaced branches raised above the snow, secured with notches, and that primitive rope she'd brought. Next came a frame of vertical posts with horizontal supports. The basic structure taking shape resembled ancient huts depicted in historical archives of primitive species, but it remained open to the elements with no visible insulation or heat source. Student Daniels appears to be constructing a dwelling using techniques that predate basic technology, Nick's larva dictated, unable to keep the condescension from his voice. While demonstrating rudimentary engineering concepts, her approach fails to account for immediate thermal requirements. Most concerning is her apparent preoccupation with tool creation. Indeed, Maya had devoted considerable time to rubbing sticks together and chipping away at stones to create sharp edges. Primitive tools, technically allowable under assessment guidelines since they were created on site from natural materials. "She's wasting valuable daylight," Assistant Blurg observed as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Temperatures will drop approximately 12 units within the next 3 hours." Nick's larva's primary hearts thrummed with the satisfaction of witnessing the inevitable failure of unspecialized biology. Continue monitoring student Daniels with increased frequency. If her vital signs approach dangerous thresholds, prepare emergency extraction. He allowed himself a small, warbling chuckle. "Though I suspect she'll request evacuation herself before midnight." Twilight cast long purple shadows across the snowy landscape as KDX-7's sun slipped below the horizon. The monitoring station's environmental sensors beeped insistently, confirming what Nick's larva's skin receptors already detected. Ambient temperature had dropped another 7 units in the past hour alone. "Status report," the professor demanded, his voice betraying a hint of concern that surprised even himself. Educational failure was one thing, student mortality was quite another, particularly with an exchange species. Junior faculty Prill's eye stalks swiveled across the monitoring screens. All students have completed basic shelter construction. Well, except. Student Daniels, Nick's larva finished, his 7 eyes narrowing as he focused on Maya's surveillance feed. Show me her vitals. The human's biometric readouts displayed remarkably stable core temperature, heart rate, and stress indicators bafflingly normal despite the plummeting environmental conditions. On screen, Maya continued working methodically, now using the crude stone tools she'd fashioned to strip bark from logs and split larger branches lengthwise. What is she doing? Nick's larva muttered, genuinely perplexed. Her frame structure remains exposed on all sides, and she spent an inordinate amount of time creating a pile of kindling. Assistant Professor Blurg hovered closer to the screen, his sensory tentacles quivering. The structure resembles ancient human habitations called cabins, according to xenoanthropology archives. But without proper sealing and insulation, it's functionally useless in current conditions. Should we intervene? Asked junior faculty Prill. Nighttime temperatures will reach -30 units within 3 hours. No unprotected human could survive that. The question hung in the air as the faculty exchanged uneasy glances. The academic assessment was sacred in galactic educational tradition, but no university wanted an interspecies incident involving a frozen exchange student. Display complete status of all other participants, Nick's larva instructed, buying time to consider the dilemma. The screen cycled through each student's sector. Glorb Tentril had completed his secretion dome and added an impressive second chamber, presumably for food storage. The structure gleamed with bioluminescent light from within, functionally superior and aesthetically pleasing. Several other students had created equally effective shelters suited to their biological needs. The vapory ice castle glittered in the moonlight, the lithomorph's burrow emitted traces of geothermal heat, the hive mind collective pulsated in synchronized waves that generated surprising warmth. All participants have successfully constructed viable shelters, Assistant Blurg confirmed. Student Daniels is the only exception. Nick's larva clicked his mandibles in frustration. Her vital signs remain stable. How is that possible in these conditions? As if answering his question, the surveillance feed showed Maya kneeling beside the pile of kindling she'd arranged beneath a stone structure. She was rapidly rotating one stick against another between her palms. After several moments of sustained effort, a small plume of smoke appeared, followed by a tiny ember that she carefully transferred to the kindling. She's creating fire. Junior faculty Prill exclaimed, eye stalks fully extended in surprise. Within minutes, flames flickered to life, casting an orange glow across Maya's worksite. The human's face, illuminated by firelight, displayed that curious expression again, lips curved upward, eyes crinkled at the corners. Primitive but effective thermal generation, Nick's larva admitted reluctantly. However, an exposed flame will provide insufficient protection through the night. Your recommendation, Professor? Blurg inquired formally, reminding Nick's larva that the final decision was his. The Zentorian professor stared at the screen, conflicted. The academic integrity demanded non-interference, but practicality suggested intervention. After a moment's deliberation, he reached a compromise. We will not intervene directly, he declared, but activate enhanced monitoring protocols, full-spectrum visuals, continuous vital sign tracking, and emergency extraction team on standby. If her core temperature drops to dangerous levels, we extract her immediately. Assessment failure noted, but without physical harm. As darkness enveloped the forest, the monitoring station switched to night vision mode. The screens now displayed ghostly green images of the test sectors, heat signatures appearing as bright spots against the cold background. Maya's fire blazed like a small sun on the monitor, but the human herself had returned to working on her structure, silhouetted against the flames. She continues construction in darkness, observed Assistant Blurg with unmistakable amazement. Most species would conserve energy during night hours. Humans are known for their persistence, Nick's larva acknowledged, settling in for what promised to be a long night of observation. Foolish persistence, but persistence nonetheless. Hour 1. Professor Nick's larva had intended to delegate the overnight monitoring to junior faculty, but curiosity kept him firmly planted at the observation station. The mystery of the human's approach, seemingly inefficient yet displaying undeniable purpose, had become professionally intriguing. "She's enclosing the frame structure," Assistant Blurg noted as Maya began fitting split logs into the vertical supports she'd established earlier. The night vision feed showed the human working with remarkable precision, notching the ends of each log so they interlocked at the corners of her structure. No nails, no adhesives, just carefully carved wood fitting together like puzzle pieces. The basic shape of a rectangular enclosure was taking form around her elevated platform. Primitive joinery techniques, Nick's larva observed, recording his commentary. Surprisingly effective given material limitations. Hour 3. The professor's mandibles clicked in astonishment as Maya continued working without break. While most species required rest cycles, particularly in cold conditions that demanded energy conservation, the human showed no signs of slowing. "Her endurance is unexpected," he admitted. The walls of Maya's structure had risen to approximately 2 meters, creating a solid enclosure. Now she was gathering armfuls of thin branches, dried grasses, and mud from near the stream. With methodical precision, she began packing this mixture into the gaps between logs, creating a crude but effective insulation. Thermal imaging shows a significant temperature differential developing between the interior and exterior of her structure, junior faculty Prill reported, sensory stalks quivering with surprise. The combination of fire and insulated walls is creating a microclimate. Clever use of available materials, Nick's larva conceded, though hardly comparable to evolved adaptations. Hour 5. Maya's activity shifted to the interior of her now enclosed structure. She had maintained her fire in a carefully arranged circle of stones near one wall. Now, she was doing something that caused Nick's larva's academic interest to peak, constructing what appeared to be a stone chimney system that would channel smoke upward while retaining heat within the structure. "She's implementing basic thermodynamic principles," the professor noted with grudging respect. "Heat circulation, smoke ventilation, thermal mass storage in the stones." Outside, snow had begun to fall heavily, accumulating on the roofs of various student shelters. While most relied on biological adaptations or simple barriers, Maya's structure was evolving into something that actively countered the environment rather than merely shielding from it. "Hour 8, Professor, you need to see this," Blurg called urgently. Nick's larva had dozed briefly, his secondary eyelids drooping after hours of observation. He blinked rapidly to clear his vision and focused on the monitor. Maya had created a sloped roof structure using overlapping sections of bark arranged like scales, allowing snow to slide off rather than accumulate. More impressively, she had constructed a stone hearth that directed heat into both the floor platform and the walls themselves. "She's channeling thermal energy throughout the structure," Nick's larva marveled. "The heat signature shows remarkable efficiency." The monitoring equipment confirmed that while outside temperatures had plummeted to -32 units, the interior of Maya's shelter maintained a steady 15 units above freezing, well within human comfort range. Hour 12. As KDX-7's faint dawn light crept across the snowy landscape, Professor Nick's larva found himself utterly transfixed by what had transpired overnight. What had begun as a simple wooden frame had transformed into a fully functional habitat that could rightfully be called a cabin. Maya had worked through the night with only brief pauses, demonstrating a level of planning and sequential problem-solving that challenged the professor's preconceptions. Each step had built upon the previous in a logical progression: structural support, weatherproofing, insulation, heat management, and even rudimentary furniture fashioned from leftover logs. "Look at these readings," junior faculty Prill said, her voice hushed with amazement. The human shelter rivals Glorb's secretion dome for thermal efficiency, but using only found materials and manipulative skill. Nick's larva couldn't dispute the evidence. The overnight transformation was not merely impressive, it was paradigm-shifting. Without specialized biology, without evolved adaptations specific to cold environments, Maya had constructed a habitat that effectively neutralized the hostile conditions. "What we're witnessing," the professor finally said, "is academic integrity overcoming his prejudice, is not the application of evolved traits, but the application of accumulated knowledge. Student Daniels isn't adapting herself to the environment, she's adapting the environment to herself." The final touches came as morning light strengthened. Maya gathered fresh evergreen boughs and arranged them on the elevated platform inside her cabin, creating a fragrant, insulated sleeping surface. With her shelter completed, she finally allowed herself to rest, sitting beside her fire and consuming one of her nutrient bars with an expression of quiet satisfaction. Record my official assessment note: Nick's larva instructed the monitoring system. Human adaptation strategy demonstrates an alternative evolutionary pathway, the externalization of adaptive traits through knowledge application and environmental manipulation. While lacking the elegant simplicity of biological adaptation, this cognitive approach shows remarkable effectiveness. He paused, then added with scientific honesty, "And I find myself professionally humbled by its success." Dawn broke fully over the testing grounds, bathing the snow-covered landscape in golden light. Professor Nick's larva had remained at the monitoring station throughout the night, his scientific curiosity thoroughly piqued by the human's unexpected performance. Now, as part of standard assessment protocol, it was time for in-person inspections. "Transport to Student Daniels' sector immediately," he instructed the hover platform pilot. "I wish to examine this structure firsthand." As they approached Maya's territory, Nick's larva could hardly believe his 7 eyes. Where yesterday there had been nothing but forest and snow, now stood a robust rectangular structure approximately 4 meters long and 3 meters wide. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney at one end, rising straight into the still morning air. "Circle the perimeter," Nick's larva instructed, recording device activated. "I want complete documentation." From above, the cabin's ingenious simplicity became apparent. The overlapping bark roof had shed the overnight snowfall efficiently. The walls were tightly fitted logs sealed with a mixture of mud, grass, and moss. Near one wall, a neat stack of additional firewood stood ready for use. The hover platform landed in the clearing before the cabin's entrance, a simple door fashioned from split logs bound together with plant fiber hinges. As Nick's larva approached, the door swung open and Maya emerged, looking remarkably well-rested despite her night of continuous labor. "Good morning, Professor," she greeted him cheerfully. "Would you like to inspect my shelter?" Nick's larva struggled to maintain his professional demeanor. "Indeed, that is the purpose of my visit." Ducking his elongated head, the professor entered the human's creation and immediately noted the dramatic temperature difference. While outside hovered around -25 units, the cabin interior maintained a comfortable +15, a 50-unit differential achieved with nothing but stone, wood, and fire. "This is Nick's larva," began, then had to recalibrate his assessment entirely. "This is remarkably sophisticated." The interior revealed ingenious details invisible from outside. The floor was a raised platform of tightly fitted branches, creating an insulating air gap between the ground and living space. The walls were double-layered in critical areas, with insulating material packed between. The stone fireplace was actually a complex heat management system, with channels directing warmth throughout the structure while safely venting smoke. "I noticed the local stone had good thermal properties," Maya explained, gesturing to the fireplace. "These particular rocks absorb heat slowly and release it gradually, so the temperature stays consistent even if the fire dies down overnight." Before Nick's larva could respond, The sound of approaching hover platforms announced the arrival of other faculty members with their top-performing students, a tradition allowing exceptional students to observe other successful approaches. Among them was Glorb Tentril, his gelatinous form rippling with what the professor recognized as agitation. Impossible, Glorb bubbled upon entering the cabin. This cannot have been constructed by a single being, especially not a soft-skinned mammal with no natural building adaptations. Several other alien students crowded the doorway, sensory organs extended in disbelief. "Those manipulator appendages," whispered Lorne the Quillback, pointing to Maya's hands. "They created all this?" Maya wiggled her fingers with a slight smile. "Opposable thumbs. Very handy things." Glorb oozed closer to the fireplace, his transparent body revealing the chemical analysis he was performing. "The thermal efficiency rivals my secretion dome," he admitted reluctantly, "though my structure required significantly less labor." "Different approaches to the same problem," Maya responded diplomatically. "Your biological solution is equally valid." Nick's larva found himself experiencing an emotion rare in his 300-year academic career, genuine surprise. Not merely at the physical structure, impressive though it was, but at the cognitive approach. It represented an adaptation strategy based not on changing oneself to suit the environment, but on changing the environment to suit oneself. "Student Daniels," he said finally, mandibles clicking in the Zentorian expression of respect, "I believe our understanding of adaptive strategies may require significant revision." The formal assessment process began once all faculty inspectors had documented Maya's shelter. Professor Nick's larva circled the interior of the cabin, scanning device in hand, measuring every aspect of its construction against the established criteria. The environmental protection factor, exceptional, he dictated as the device recorded his findings. Thermal regulation, exceeds requirements by 27%. Structural integrity, sufficient to withstand local weather patterns for an estimated 14 to 17 planetary cycles. Resource efficiency, optimal use of available materials with minimal waste. Maya stood quietly by the fireplace, occasionally adding small branches to maintain the comfortable temperature. The other alien students had been permitted to remain for the assessment, creating an unexpected teaching opportunity. "Student Daniels," Nick's larva said finally, completing his examination, "your shelter not only meets but exceeds all assessment requirements. By any objective standard, this is the most effective non-biological solution I have encountered in 300 years of teaching this course." A ripple of surprised murmurs passed through the gathered aliens. Glorb's gelatinous form darkened slightly, the muck-weller equivalent of a frown. "Thank you, Professor," Maya replied. "Though I should clarify, it's not entirely non-biological. Human brains are biological adaptations too, just specialized for problem-solving, rather than specific environmental conditions." Nick's larva's scientific curiosity overwhelmed his professorial reserve. "Would you explain your approach? The evolutionary strategy it represents seems counterintuitive to established survival theory." Maya nodded, warming to the topic. Humans evolved in an environment that changed rapidly and unpredictably. Instead of developing specialized biological features for specific conditions, we developed generalized intelligence, and these. She held up her hands, wiggling those curious 5-digited appendages. Rather than waiting millions of years for our bodies to adapt to each new environment, we learned to modify our surroundings. But such an approach requires transmitting complex knowledge between generations, Assistant Professor Blurg observed. A significant evolutionary investment. "Exactly," Maya agreed. "We're not individually adapted to survive cold environments like this moon. I'd freeze without shelter, just as the professor predicted. But collectively, human knowledge encompasses solutions for virtually any environment. I've never personally built a cabin before. But I understand the principles because that knowledge has been preserved and shared." Nick's larva found himself fascinated. So rather than evolving biological antifreeze compounds like the crystallex or hibernation cycles like the lithomorphs. We remember how our ancestors solved similar problems and improve upon their methods, Maya finished. It's adaptation through accumulation of knowledge rather than accumulation of genetic traits. The professor moved to the stone fireplace, examining the clever channeling system that distributed heat throughout the structure. This approach has significant advantages. While biological adaptations are specific to particular conditions, this cognitive manipulative strategy could theoretically work anywhere. That's why we've survived as a species, Maya explained. Humans have lived in Arctic regions, deserts, rainforests, and even underwater habitations, all with effectively the same biology. We don't adapt to environments, we adapt environments to us. Glorb, unable to contain himself, bubbled indignantly. But this strategy is enormously labor-intensive. My secretion shelter formed in minutes while you worked through an entire night cycle. Maya shrugged good-naturedly. Different evolutionary priorities. Your species evolved efficiency for specific conditions. Humans evolved versatility for variable conditions. Nick's larva clicked his mandibles thoughtfully, experiencing what his species called a perception shift, a fundamental reorganization of understanding. Throughout his career, he had classified species by their biological adaptations, considering technology-dependent beings like humans as evolutionary underachievers reliant on artificial crutches. But watching Maya explain the elegant logic of human adaptive strategy, he realized he had fundamentally misunderstood. What humans lacked in specialized biology, they compensated for with specialized cognition and adaptation so versatile it could solve problems the organism had never previously encountered. I believe, Nick's larva announced to the assembled faculty and students, we are witnessing not a lesser form of adaptation, but perhaps the most sophisticated adaptation strategy in the galaxy, generalized problem-solving applied to specific environmental challenges. 3 days later, the Galactic Survival Academy's Grand Lecture Hall buzzed with excited chatter as students awaited the final assessment results. Professor Nick's larva stood at the podium, 7 eyes scanning the assembled xenobiology class, mandibles twitching with uncharacteristic nervousness. Before announcing the assessment results, he began, his warbling voice silencing the room. I must acknowledge that this year's primitive survival challenge has prompted a significant revision to our academic understanding. The holographic display behind him activated, showing side-by-side images of various student shelters, each impressive in its own way. Glorb Tentral's multi-chambered secretion dome drew appreciative murmurs, as did the Crystallix's refracted light mineral habitat and the Lithomorph's geothermally heated burrow. Excellence in biological adaptation remains the cornerstone of survival strategy, Nick's larva continued, as demonstrated by student Tentral's remarkable secretion architecture, which earned 97 out of 100 possible points. Glorb's gelatinous form flushed with pride, indicating pigments pulsating slightly as he absorbed the recognition. However, the professor added, mandibles clicking for emphasis, this year we have witnessed an alternative adaptive strategy of equal, perhaps even superior evolutionary significance. The display shifted to show Maya's log cabin from multiple angles, including thermal imagery, revealing its exceptional heat retention properties. Student Daniels has achieved what no exchange student has accomplished in the 8,000 cycle history of this academy. A perfect score of 100 points, plus a 5-point innovation bonus previously awarded only twice in our institutional records. Shocked whispers rippled through the assembled students. Maya, sitting quietly in the back row with her paper notebook, looked genuinely surprised. The human approach, utilizing cognitive problem-solving and manipulative appendages to create environmental solutions, represents not a primitive dependence on tools, as previously classified in our xenobiology texts, but rather a meta-adaptation that transcends specific environmental conditions. Nick's larva gestured toward Maya with a respectful extension of his primary appendage. Student Daniels, would you accept the Adaptation Innovation Medal of the Academy? As Maya made her way to the podium, students who had previously mocked her now extended various appendages in congratulatory gestures. The quillback retracted his defensive spines, completely a sign of absolute trust in his species. Even Glorb Tentral's coloration shifted to the blue-purple spectrum, indicating scholarly respect. "Thank you, Professor," Maya said, accepting the iridescent medallion. "Though I should clarify that I'm not exceptionally skilled among humans. Most of my species could build something similar with the same basic knowledge." This statement caused another wave of murmurs throughout the hall. Nick's larva's secondary heart valves fluttered at the implication. "Most humans possess this level of adaptive capability?" he asked, voice pitched higher than usual. "More or less," Maya confirmed. "Some better, some worse, but problem-solving is our primary evolutionary strategy. Instead of waiting for our bodies to adapt over millennia, we just figure things out." The professor's lesson plan for the remainder of the term flashed before his eyes, suddenly outdated and insufficient. "I believe," he announced, "we shall restructure this semester's curriculum to include comparative adaptation strategies with particular focus on cognitive versus biological approaches." As the assembly concluded, Nick's larva overheard a conversation between Glorb Tentral and several other advanced students clustered near Maya as they exited the hall. "You really have no specialized cold adaptations at all?" Glorb was asking, his translucent form rippling with curiosity rather than his previous condescension. "None," Maya confirmed cheerfully. "Before we figured out fire and shelter, we just died in extreme environments. Yet now your species inhabits virtually every climate on your homeworld," observed a Vapori student, tendrils swirling thoughtfully. "And you're expanding to other worlds with even more hostile conditions," added Lorne. "That's humans for you," Maya replied with that curious lip-curving expression. "We see a deadly environment and think, hey, I bet we could live there if we just rearranged some stuff." The aliens exchanged meaningful glances, a new understanding passing between them. It was Glorb who finally vocalized what they were all thinking, his gelatinous form shuddering slightly. "So the galaxy's scariest species isn't the one with the most poison or the sharpest claws or the strongest exoskeleton," he bubbled quietly. "It's the soft, fragile one that looks at a killing frost and thinks, I can work with this." Professor Nick's larva, overhearing this exchange, felt his mandibles click in involuntary agreement. Perhaps the old xenobiological axiom needed updating. The most dangerous organism in any environment is not the one most perfectly adapted to it, but the one most capable of adapting it. He made a note to begin his next lecture with precisely that point.